everybody, Mike Naso here with a video update on Chris. Uh, in the evening yesterday, I left you with another video update saying, will Chris survive? Dun dun dun. And yes, it has, but just barely hanging on as a very weak depression. The Hurricane Center is probably being generous, keeping it at 35 miles an hour. It's probably more 25 or 30 miles an hour. But it is expected to continue to the west-northwest, skirt the north coast of Cuba, strengthening to a tropical storm as it does so, and then enter into the Gulf of Mexico and strengthen some more, being steered by a large ridge of high pressure. We're going to get in a lot about Chris over the next couple of minutes. Here's the latest on tropical depression. Chris, as of 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, is at 21.3, 71.6, so it continues to gain in latitude and longitude. Winds 35 miles an hour. It's moving west at 13, or maybe just north of west, and that pressure is still about 1,012 millibars, so very high pressure. And you can see the track here through time, a depression in 12 hours. This time tomorrow, heading towards Cuba, probably strengthening back into a storm. And then by tomorrow night, Saturday night, skirting the north coast. Sunday morning, exiting the north coast as it kind of skirts along it, and then by Monday morning it should be in the Gulf, and intensification should ensue until landfall, and they have it up to about 60 miles per hour nearing landfall in extreme northern Mexico. But this has to be stressed that anywhere from the Louisiana coastline all the way down to the northern Yucatan and the Bay of Campeche has to watch Chris very carefully, and it might not even be there in 5 days, but if it is, it could be intensifying, and the Gulf looks pretty ripe for conditions for strengthening, steady strengthening actually, and if it were a more significant system entering it, more significant strengthening, when you have a large ridge of high pressure and the hurricane builds its own environment along with that, it is able to strengthen. But this is only a tropical depression and won't be much when it gets in the Gulf. But the Gulf is pretty favorable and looks to be over the next several days. Here's the latest visible image of Chris. There's the center right there, and you can see it's still got the rotation with it. Same thing that happened yesterday. It was down here, thunderstorms blew up, mid-level circulation went down, low level continued. What happened last night? Blew up, thunderstorms went down, low-level circulation continuing. It kind of looks here like it's trying to blow back up again. If the shear can stop, it can develop. Here's the IR. You would not even know you had a tropical depression right there if we didn't have the coordinates. In fact, this is exactly why in the 1940s you might not even known that was there. 10, 12 millibars, people would have had clear skies. Look at that water vapor. You cannot even see it. It's right in here. I mean, although the big difference now compared to today is this little carrot-shaped sector in here is the only thing left of the dry air. As you have the upper low still, and you have the upper low forming here, Chris is kind of getting sandwiched in between them, and it's kind of getting to the point where it's like, okay, come on, give me a break here. But Chris, you put up with it this far. Can you make it through? That's the big question. So it is getting in a more moist environment, but it's not looking good right now at all. And you can see again, sandwiched between these two lows, it's somewhere in here. And you have the upper low here, and here comes Chris, barreling right through the center of that. So conditions could become a little bit more favorable as this continues to move. And as this kind of hangs around here, this could eventually serve to maybe ventilate it. But again, this ventilation stuff is considering this thing had convection right now and was firing over the center. Then you're going to see the ventilation. But if this thing's just a naked swirl and depression like it is now, this is dynamics for hurricane ventilation of a system coiling up, as it was over here. This is not the dynamic when I'm talking about these ventilations for a little depression unless it flares back up. So there's a lot of questions. Notice the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of moisture in it, and we could actually see Debbie form there over the next day or day and a half and move into Mexico real quick as it gets sheared from whatever comes of Chris. In fact, it might even form before Chris gets there. Here's the latest shear map, and you can see 5 to 10 knots over the system, but you have the flow still this way from the upper feature, the upper level low in here, and then you have the upper level low here still shearing it. So although, I mean, looks are deceiving, you're going, well, 5 to 10 knots over it. Yes, but you still have, what is this, 40, 30 knots on its east, and you have 40, 30 knots on its west. So, again, it's sandwiched. Notice how low the shear is out here for our next system coming. This could be a significant hurricane, and by that I really mean it this time. Although Chris might not let us down, although I don't really think they want another hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, and you know what? Chris has driven me nuts this far. Hopefully it'll just die out over Cuba, because we're going to have problems anyway with this low shear over here over the next several days, and this is going to be a much more significant feature. So we don't need any little pests close to land causing problems. Shear tendency straight into the Gulf of Mexico, favorable, high pressure aloft. That'll keep things pretty favorable in the Gulf for when it gets there, if it gets there, and depending on how strong it gets, it could strengthen. Here's the 24-hour forecast for the sea surface temperatures, and you could see, I mean, this is where it is. These are warm waters. These blues are enough to sustain a hurricane or even a major hurricane. But these oranges and yellows, these are boiling waters. And the Gulf, Stacy Stewart at the P3 Tour, he told Eric Dunn, he said, hey, this Gulf is of great concern. That's what he said about 2 months ago for this year. So if we have all these little eddies and the loop current in here, and the Gulf Stream, if this thing skirts Cuba, oh, it's not doing anything. It's skirting Cuba. It's 40 miles an hour. It's 45 miles an hour. Not doing anything. Hey, it's 45. Oh my goodness. Recon just found 65 knot flight level winds. It's back up to 65, and then towards another pool of warm water out here. So we really have to keep an eye on it as it moves in the Gulf. But again, if it starts showing improvement, then you start talking about, okay, when this gets in the Gulf, this is going to happen. As of right now, we have to assume what will happen is that Chris will stay weak and then move into the Gulf and strengthen. That's the forecast thus far. But you can see Chris in here, upper low, what's going to happen? Here's our other feature. And notice here how it's starting to get maybe... You look at this sometimes and you say, okay, now is this a curly Q down here in its own right and this another curly Q? Or is it kind of a larger wave like that? And I think it is kind of a larger wave as it moves this direction. Keep an eye on that. Cockburn Town in the Turks Caicos, Bahamas. Remember a couple of days ago I said, is it going to head into Hispaniola or Cockburn Town? Well, it took the northern trip, and you can see here it's right near the Turks and Caicos. And if it moves due west now, it's straight over eastern Cuba. But if it keeps that trajectory it's taking right now, it's still generally more towards the northern coast of Cuba, which is not good because this is the deadly part of Cuba for hurricanes. This will tear it apart. This is the more favorable part of Cuba. Well, I mean, it can weaken a storm by any means, even especially a weak storm like this, but it's less mountainous terrain, so it might be able to sustain itself a little bit. And sometimes when storms have convection, they get better organized over land. They kind of spiral out and the outflow expands, and it kind of leaves the coastline rejuvenated, if you will. There have been a few examples in the past. I know too many of them to even name them. Here's the model spread. You can see the extrapolated motion currently is, if it kept its current track, it'd still miss Cuba and go well south of the Keys, though, thankfully. But you can see it's generally heading up towards the western Gulf of Mexico. GFDL and a lot of the models still taking it over Cuba, which is a very, very good possibility. But basically anywhere in this area is where the model spread is, with the hurricane center north of the model consensus. MM5, 96 hours. There goes Chris, or what's left of Chris, through the Gulf of Mexico. And here's another little system in the Bay of Campeche spinning up. And this makes landfall in about 102 hours, says the MM5. And so if it did, it probably would just kind of be one of those 40, 50 mile an hour, at most 60 mile an hour. And I say 60 because Jose did that last year. And one of those weak tropical storms right into Mexico. And if Chris did start to redevelop with outflow, it probably wouldn't impact it in time. So that would probably just go into Mexico, not be a problem, but still might be a named storm. Who knows? You can see behind it, tropical wave coming, and our two systems out here. 144-hour no-gaps system near the Cape Verdes, and then you have Chris making landfall in northern Mexico. That's plausible. The UK Met you can see in, what is it, 72 hours? Yeah. In here and towards the Gulf of Mexico. UK Met's a difficult model to get, because it's always either not showing up or entire grid undefined or some crap like that. Here's the NAM north of the Yucatan in 84 hours. Plausible again. Here's the GFS this is 120 hours, and you can see there it is making landfall in the Texas-Mexico border, whatever's left of it there on the vorticity. So, I'm starting to lose my voice, you can tell, can't you? Been talking about the last few days. Also, the GFDL, stronger, but into Mexico. And we don't want to wish on Mexico, but it'd be better if it goes to Mexico than the United States, for sure, for us. There's our system forming in the Atlantic Basin, heading this way, west-northwest. Notice this little curly Q up here shouldn't do anything. And then there's Chris looking ragged over here. Further out, another wave coming off, and then you got this piece of energy and this one and this one. So active Cape Verde, and even further out, more about to move off. Got to keep an eye on that. The Gulf, there's a little system that could briefly become a storm and move into Mexico. There's that upper low retrograding away from Chris, which is off the screen, which can't see yet, as Chris will probably move again, generally in a westerly direction, somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico. Eastern Pacific, here's what's left of Gilma. Fabio is off the screen here in the Central Pacific. And then the Western Pacific, we have a new system forming, and what's left of Prapirun dissipating over China. So stay tuned to the latest on IPR on Chris.